cool is that, right? See that?
Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Films. My name is Alan and I'm looking to adopt a baby Yoda. So if any of you guys know about any baby Yodas that are out there all alone and scared and needing a home, well, please contact me. I promise I won't eat it. So one of the first things me and American Ben talked about after the first episode of The Mandalorian, where the baby Yoda was revealed, was the possibility of seeing the baby Yoda in full Mandalorian Beskar. That's full Mandalorian armor for all you Aratai who don't speak Mandoa. This was followed by more speculation. Would Mandalorian Baby Yoda be accepted by the other Mandalorian? Would the Baby Yoda's force powers create some friction? Is the Baby Yoda, hallowed be his name, innately too good and unable to follow the bloody ways of the Mandalorians? And of course, would the Mandalorian actually take on the Baby Yoda as a son/apprentice? Well, let's take a look at the Mandalorian's motives first and foremost, because before we can decide whether the Mandalorians would accept Baby Yoda, we have to see whether the Mandalorian would be willing to raise this little guy. Now, clearly, he's risked his entire life and reputation as a bounty hunter by saving the Baby Yoda, who was originally his bounty. He broke the strict bounty hunter guild code of not asking questions about the bounty, and then taking it a few steps further by breaking and entering into a trusted client's home, murdering several of his guards, and then, of course, stealing back the bounty. At this point, the Mandalorian's future as a bounty hunter is pretty much over. But, you know what, there is going to be a spoiler if you haven't seen episode 4, so skip ahead like a minute if you don't want to get spoiled. The second the Mandalorian finds a nice and safe village with a caring family willing to take on the Baby Yoda, blessed be his name, the Mandalorian is ready to leave this little guy behind, for his safety, of course. Unfortunately, a bounty hunter, probably the first of many, was able to use a tracking fob to find out where the Baby Yoda was pretty quickly. At this point, I'm guessing these tracking fobs key in on an individual's unique biosignature, so as long as a bounty hunter is within the same planet, or, I don't know, a few hundred miles of the Baby Yoda will never be safe. Now, originally, the Mandalorian thought that the Baby Yoda would be safer if he was left behind in some peaceful Brill village, but by the end of the episode, he probably realized that Brill villages are incredibly dangerous. By the way, they finally captured just how terrifying a Scout Walker can be, especially when you're not equipped to fight one. Great job on the episode. Anyway, the Mandalorian realizes now that the Baby Yoda is much safer with him than anywhere else. Now, in the first episode, the Mandalorian seemed like this ideal bounty hunter, extremely disciplined and rule-abiding. The bounty hunter code stresses that a bounty is no longer a sentient being with rights. They're more similar to a piece of property, something that the Mandalorian was really great at practicing. So what changes his views on the Baby Yoda? Well, it could be something to do with the fact that the Mandalorian was at one time a foundling. Foundlings are an important part of the Mandalorian recruitment process. Because of the violent nature of the Mandalorians, these people oftentimes find themselves in the midst of battle or in the ruins following a battle. Orphans who were found amongst the wreckage were usually adopted by the Mandalorians and made one of their own. The Mandalorian had lost his parents in a separatist attack during the Clone Wars, which explains his hatred for droids. Now, in the Legends Mandalorian era, usually only orphans who showed that they had a warrior spirit were usually adopted. But Disney's canon is all about making, the Mandalorians more modern and acceptable for these times where everyone's a winner as long as you don't kill yourself eating a Tide Pod. This Mandalorian is clearly a benevolent hunter. When he brings his Beskar ingots to the Forge Master, he always makes sure that a portion of this extremely precious metal goes towards supporting new foundlings. The whole adopting orphans thing used to be more of a tradition in Legends. Just random acts of kindness, but now under the Disney canon, this whole foundling thing seems to be more organized and almost bureaucratic. I'm sure they have like administrative costs, marketing costs, executives to pay and all that. So before you donate your hard-earned credits or Beskar to the Mandalorian Foundling organization, I would actually recommend you do a deep dive into what percentage of your donations go towards the Foundling organization's overhead. You might be surprised. So we clearly have a motive for why the Mandalorian would save the Baby Yoda. I'd also argue he's put himself in a position where now he'll basically have to keep the little guy in his sight for at least the next few years. We're not really sure why the Imperial client wanted the Baby Yoda. so we can't gauge just how far they would be willing to chase the Mandalorian. I'm sure it's pretty far though. Then there's also the entire Bounty Hunter Guild, who also wants his head as well. The only people willing to help the Mandalorians are his own people, who helped him fight off the bounty hunters in the first place. Because they stuck their neck out for him, now the Mandalorians actually have to move their creepy basement fort to another planet. But helping a Mandalorian is one thing, it's probably the way things go with these guys. But accepting a little green alien into their ranks, well, that's a whole nother discussion. In Legends, they say that Mandalorians weren't actually humans to begin with. They were a species that kind of looked like predators known as the Twang, who battled for supremacy on the home world of Coruscant many tens of thousands of years ago. At least in the early days, the Twang accepted all who came before them, regardless of gender, race, politics, and all that other nonsense. As long as you had a warrior spirit and were willing to follow the Mandalorian way, you were in. Strangely enough, the Disney version of the Mandalorians is much more homogenous. Even the pacifist and probably more progressive true Mandalorians were made up of only humans, as it should be. And the only aliens we see on Mandalore were literally poisoning the lunch drinks of school children. So one of the first roadblocks that the Baby Yoda would face on his journey to becoming a little Beskar armed badass would be discrimination, because we're not really sure if the Mandalorians still accept aliens. And Disney canon doesn't really say anything about that either yet. Then there's that issue of the Baby Yoda using the Force. As we've talked about in the past, Mandalorians do not like Force users. They've been screwed over and nearly genocided by both the Sith and Jedi, and in many ways the reason why they've developed such advanced armor and weapons is to give themselves an advantage over these Force-wielding foes. However, that's not to say that in their long history there have not been Force-sensitive Mandalorians. There have been. Tar Vizsla was the first Mandalorian to be inducted, and by inducted I mean most likely taken from his parents as a baby and given to the Jedi Order. Unlike most Jedi, Tar Vizsla wasn't able to completely leave his roots behind when he joined the Order. When he went through his gathering, he created a lightsaber with a black blade. It was known as the Darksaber, and in my opinion, one of the coolest lightsabers ever made. Now, Tar Vizsla would eventually leave the Jedi Order in relatively good terms and then become the Mandalore, or leader of his people. His Darksaber became a symbol of leadership as well. His ascendancy to the throne actually repaired relations between the Jedi and the Mandalorians for a period of time. Then later on, during the Clone Wars, a rogue Jedi defied the Jedi Council and came to Mandalore's aid after Death Watch aligned themselves with Maul and several criminal syndicates and tried to take over the planet. And then, of course, you had Jedi who were part of the Republic Special Forces Unit, 18 Murtu Khan, and also Barden Jusik. While most Jedi tried to maintain a professional relationship with the clones under their command, Etain and Barden were in complete awe of the men they served with. Not only were they incredibly good at fighting, they were also very loyal. On top of that, these two Jedi were very young and impressionable as well. And unlike most Jedi, they fought with the specialized clone commando units. The clone commandos were especially trained by Mandalorian warriors, who in a way adopted each member of his team and taught the clones about Mandalorian culture and the Mandalorian way of life. Etain Turmukan would eventually fall in love with one of the Republic clone commandos, and even have a baby with one. Barden Jusik, who was your typical 20-year-old guy who thought that the Mandalorians were the most badass warriors in the world, also would adopt the Mandalorian way. I mean, sure, he tried to follow the Jedi way and be a good Jedi, but their very conservative approach on life just couldn't compete with the Mandalorians, who were basically running around the galaxy and melting people's faces off with their, wrist-mounted flamethrowers. Then, during the Mandalorian Civil War, Jedi rebels like Kanan Jarrus and Ezra Bridger would once again come to Mandalore's aid and help Sabine Wren and Bo-Katan Kryze defeat the pro-Imperial Mandalorian factions. So by 9 ABY, I would argue that the Mandalorians were probably on pretty good terms with the Jedi, and at least one half of the Force user equation. The crimes of Revan would have happened almost 4,000 years ago, and the destruction of Mandalore by Republic forces would have happened several hundreds of years in the past. Their latest enemy actually would have been the Empire, who had carried out the Great Purge against them. So if the Mandalorians are still following their old code, I would argue that they would have to allow Baby Yoda to join their ranks, as long as Baby Yoda could, show that he had some warrior spirit inside of him, which I think he does. Or she does. Don't know yet. And his Force abilities would only increase the likelihood of his acceptance. Mandalorians care more that you win a fight rather than how you win a fight. So the biggest question that will decide whether we see the Baby Yoda in a little baby Beskar armor suit with a little baby jetpack and a baby helmet and baby little blasters is if the Mandalorian is actually able to keep him safe and out of the hands of bounty hunters, the Jedi, and the Empire. So those are kind of my thoughts about the Baby Yoda. I think that the Mandalorian will be taking care of the Baby Yoda for at least a few more years, hopefully. And, that will influence the Baby Yoda's development, even though I'm sure it'll take another 50 years for the Baby Yoda to become like an adolescent. But I really do hope in that process the Baby Yoda becomes more Mandalorian, because I don't really want to see another, Yoda Jedi kind of figure. I would much rather see a Yoda in Beskar armor shooting people in the face and also using the Force at the same time. That would be epic. But guys, let me know in the comment section below what you think. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that life is a movie and you are the protagonist. Also, we just opened up a Generation Films Instagram, so check it out.